Nancy wiped the sweat from her forehead as she pushed the heavy mop across the marble floor. The tall office building was beautiful, with shiny glass windows and smooth, cold floors. But to Nancy, it was just another place to survive. She was a cleaner, just a poor girl from the village trying to make a life in a big city. Every day, she arrived before sunrise and left after sunset, working hard to earn enough to pay her rent and buy food. Life had never been easy for her. Nancy had big dreams. She wanted to own a small restaurant someday. She imagined a warm place where people could eat fresh, tasty meals. She dreamed of the smell of fried plantain and hot pepper soup filling the air. But dreams like that seemed far away when all she earned was barely enough to survive. She shared a small, crowded room with her best friend Ada. The room was tiny, with a tin mattress on the floor and an old fan that barely worked. At night, when the city light shone through the cracked window, they would lie awake and talk about their future. I will be a fashion designer, Ada always said with a smile. I will sew clothes for rich women and live in a big house. Nancy laughed softly, and I will cook food for busy workers. Maybe one day I will even serve the CEO of this building. But deep down, Nancy wondered if those dreams would ever come true. The office building where Nancy worked belonged to Mr. Chike, a powerful and mysterious man. Nobody saw him often, but everyone feared him. They said he was cold hearted and cared about only money. Nancy had never met him. She only cleaned his office, the largest and most beautiful space on the top floor. Sometimes she would pause and stare at the leather chairs, golden pens, and the city view from his wide windows. It felt like another world. But Nancy never complained. She believed that kindness and hard work would take her far one day. One rainy afternoon, when the sky grew dark and the city seemed to shiver under the heavy rain, the rain poured hard, hitting the city like a drumbeat. Nancy pulled her thin sweater tighter as she hurried to the bus stop. She was tired, her feet ached, and all she wanted was to go home and rest. As she waited, she noticed something unusual. An old woman sat alone on the pavement, shivering under the cold rain. Her clothes were soaked and her hands trembled. People walked past her without stopping, too busy to care. Nancy felt a tug in her heart. She could not leave the woman there. She stepped closer. Mama, are you okay? She asked softly. The old woman looked up. Her face was wrinkled and her hair was gray, but her eyes were kind. I I am fine, my daughter, she said weakly. Nancy knew she was not fine. Without thinking, she took off her sweater and placed it around the woman's shoulder. The old woman's fingers were cold as ice. You cannot stay here, Nancy gently said. Come with me. Let's find a place to sit. The woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. Nancy held her hand and led her to a small roadside shop where they could sit and stay warm. Inside the shop, Nancy bought the woman a cup of hot tea. It was the last of her money, but she did not care. The woman needed help. Why are you sitting in the rain, Mama? Nancy asked, concerned in her voice. The old woman sighed deeply. Sometimes life takes you to places you never expect, she said. Nancy did not ask more questions. She simply smiled and stayed beside the woman until the rain stopped. When it was time to leave, the old woman held Nancy's hand tightly. "Thank you, my daughter," she said softly. "May your kindness bring you blessings." Nancy smiled, feeling warm inside despite the cold rain. She had no idea that her kindness would change her life forever. The next morning, the office was buzzing with excitement. Something big was happening. As Nancy mopped the marble floor, she heard the other staff whispering, "The CEO is back," one of the secretaries said in a hushed voice. Nancy's heart skipped a beat. Mr. Chike, the powerful and mysterious man who owned the company, had returned after months away. Everyone said he was a hard man who trusted no one. At exactly noon, a black car pulled up outside. The air grew tense, the doors opened, and a tall man in a sharp suit stepped out. His face was strong and serious. He moved with the confidence of a man who controlled everything around him. Nancy peeked from behind a pillar. This was the first time she had ever seen the CEO. There was something cold about his face, but there was also a strange sadness in his eyes. She shook her head and returned to her work. Whatever happened in the world of the rich had nothing to do with a poor cleaner like her, but fate had other plans. Nancy continued her work quietly. The air in the office felt different. The CEO's return had made everyone nervous. People moved quickly, avoiding his sharp eyes and harsh tone. As Nancy cleaned the executive lounge, she heard voices coming from the CEO's office. The door was slightly open. Mr. Chike was on the phone, and his voice was filled with anger and worry. "Find her," he barked. "She has been missing since yesterday." Nancy froze. Was he talking about the old woman? Her heart pounded as she remembered the old woman's weak smile and trembling hand. Could she be someone important? Mr. Nancy continued, his voice heavy with frustration. "I told you to watch her. If anything happens to my mother, you will regret it." His mother? Nancy gasped softly. The woman she had helped in the rain was the CEO's mother. Her hand shook as she finished cleaning. Should she tell him? What if he thought she was lying? But if the old woman was still missing, she had to speak up. Gathering her courage, Nancy knocked softly on the CEO's office door. "Come in," his deep voice commanded. She stepped inside, her heart beating fast. The office was grand, leather chairs, golden pen, and a massive glass window overlooking the city. Mr. Chike stood by the desk, his sharp eyes narrowing when he saw her. "Yes?" he asked coldly. Nancy swallowed hard. "Sir, I I think I saw your mother," she said quietly. His face changed instantly. The coldness melted into shock. "Where? When?" "Yesterday, sir," Nancy explained. "I found her sitting in the rain by the bus stop. She was cold, so I gave her my sweater and bought her tea." For a moment, the powerful man stood still. Then he let out a strong breath, as if a heavy weight had lifted from his chest. "You helped my mother?" His voice softened slightly. Nancy nodded. "Yes, sir. I didn't know who she was. I just wanted to help." Without another word, Mr. Chike picked up his phone and made a quick call. "Check the roadside shops near the bus stop," he ordered. "She might still be there." When he hung up, he turned to Nancy. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You may go." As she left the office, Nancy's heart raced. She had never imagined that a simple act of kindness would lead her to the most powerful man in the city. The next day, as Nancy mopped the lobby, a familiar voice called her name. She turned and gasped. It was the old woman, dry, warm, and smiling brightly. "My daughter," the woman said, holding Nancy's hand. "I have been looking for you." Nancy smiled in relief. "Mama, you are safe." The woman nodded. "Thanks to you, my son told me everything." Then just then, the elevator door opened. Mr. Chike stepped out. He no longer looked cold. There was warmth in his eyes as he approached them. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, his voice calm. "You showed kindness when no one else did." Nancy blushed, feeling shy under his intense gaze. "It was nothing, sir. I just did what anyone would do." His mother laughed softly. "Not everyone would help an old woman in the rain," she said. "You have a good heart, my daughter." Mr. Chike nodded. "And I don't forget those who help my family." Before Nancy could reply, the old woman spoke again. "I have a wish," she said, turning to her son. "I want this girl to work somewhere better. She is too kind to remain invisible." Nancy's eyes widened in shock. What did she mean? Mr. Chike smiled faintly. "If that is your wish, Mama, I will make it happen." Nancy could barely breathe. Was her life about to change? The next morning, Nancy arrived at work feeling anxious. She had been called to the top floor, something that had never happened before. As she rolled the elevator up, her heart pounded in her chest. When she entered the CEO's office, she found Mr. Chike waiting for her. His mother sat nearby, her smile warm and comforting. "You helped my mother when no one else did," Mr. Chike began. "That kind of heart is rare." Nancy bowed her head. "I only did what I thought was right, sir." He nodded. "From today, you are no longer a cleaner." Nancy's breath caught in her throat. "Sir?" "You will work as my mother's personal assistant," he continued. "She trusts you, and so do I." Tears filled Nancy's eyes. Was this really happening? A new life? A better future? All because of one act of kindness. The old woman held Nancy's hand. "My son may be powerful," she said softly, "but kindness is the greatest power of all. Never forget that." Nancy smiled through her tears. For the first time in a long while, her dreams felt within reach. Her journey was just beginning. Nancy's heart pounded as she walked out of the CEO's office. Her mind was spinning. She had come to work that morning as a poor cleaner, but now she was the personal assistant to the CEO's mother. The other workers stared at her in shock. No one could believe it. How could a simple cleaner rise so high? But Nancy knew the answer: kindness. Ada, her best friend, was waiting for her in the staff locker's room. "Nancy," she cried, grabbing her hands. "Is it true? Are you really working for the CEO's mother?" Nancy laughed softly, still trying to believe it herself. "Yes, Ada, it is true. My life is changing." Ada hugged her tightly. "I told you, Nancy, your kindness would open doors one day." Nancy smiled, but deep inside, she felt nervous. Would she be good enough for this new job? Could a simple village girl like her survive in the world of the rich and powerful? That afternoon, Nancy met with the CEO's mother, Madame Evelyn, in a private lounge. The room was elegant, with soft leather chairs and gold-trimmed table. Nancy sat quietly, waiting for instructions. "My dear, Madam Evelyn began gently. Your new job is simple. You will assist me with my daily needs. I am not as strong as I used to be, and I need someone I trust by my side. Nancy nodded quickly. I will do my best, Mama. Madam Evelyn smiled warmly. I know you will. But remember one thing, never lose your kindness. In this world, people forget their heart when they gain power. Her words stayed with Nancy long after their meeting. Days turned into weeks, and Nancy adjusted to her new life. She no longer wore a cleaner uniform. Instead, she dressed in smart, elegant clothes that Madam Evelyn provided. Every day, Nancy assisted Madam Evelyn with errands, meetings, and personal cares. The old woman treated her like a daughter, and soon they became very close. But behind the beautiful wall of the company, trouble was brewing. Nancy began to notice something strange. Whispers in the hallway, fearful look from employee, and cold tension whenever Mr. Chike entered the room. One evening, as Nancy helped Madam Evelyn organize her documents, the old woman sighed deeply. My son is not as strong as he seems, she said quietly. Nancy looked up in surprise. What do you mean, Mama? Madam Evelyn's eyes were sad. Power can be lonely, my child. My son works so hard, but his heart is heavy. He trusts no one. Nancy thought of the coldness in Mr. Chike's eye. Was that why he seemed so distant? Later that night, as Nancy left the office, she overheard two managers whispering by the elevator. The CEO's enemies are getting closer, one said. If they find out his weakness, they will destroy him. Nancy's heart raced. What weakness are they talking about? And who wanted to destroy him? Nancy's life continued to change, but danger was drawing near. One afternoon, while delivering documents to Mr. Chike's office, Nancy found him deep in thought. His usually calm face was tensed, and there was anger in his eyes. You are late, he said coldly. Nancy bowed her head. I am sorry, sir. It won't happen again. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her closely. My mother trusts you, he said slowly. But tell me, why did you help her that day? Nancy lifted her head. Because it was the right thing to do, sir. For a moment, the cold marks on his face softened. Most people only help when they want something, he said quietly. But you're different. Nancy left his office feeling confused. Why did his words sound so sad? The next day, Madam Evelyn fell sick. Nancy stayed by her side, caring for her like a daughter. But the office grew darker as whispers of betrayal spread. Nancy knew one thing. Something dangerous was coming. And somehow, she was now part of it. One rainy night, as Nancy prepared to leave, she heard arguments from Mr. Chike's office. You are losing control, a man's angry voice said. If you don't act, they will take everything from you. Nancy froze by the door. Who was threatening the CEO? I am not weak, Mr. Chike's voice snapped. No one will destroy what I have built. Nancy stepped back quietly, her heart pounding. Something terrible was happening behind the scenes, and somehow it would affect all of them. That night, as she lay in bed, she remembered Madame Evelyn's words. Never lose your kindness. Nancy knew she was no longer just a poor cleaner. She was part of the dangerous world now, a world where kindness might be the only thing that could save them all. Nancy arrived early the next morning, but the office felt colder than usual. Whispers floated through the hallway, rumors of betrayal, of someone working against Mr. Chike from the inside. As she entered Madame Evelyn's private lounge, she found the old woman sitting quietly, her face pale and worried. "My child," Madame Evelyn said softly, "something is wrong. I can feel it." Nancy knelt beside her, holding her wrinkled hand. "Mama, what is happening? Who would want to hurt your son?" Madame Evelyn sighed deeply. "When a man has power, enemies grow in the shadows. My son trusts no one except you." Nancy's heart tightened. "Me?" The old woman smiled weakly. "Yes, my dear. You have no greed in your heart. That is rare in this world." Suddenly, the door burst open. Mr. Chike stood there, his face dark with anger. "Mama, are you feeling better?" he asked, but his voice lacked warmth. "I am fine," Madame Evelyn replied, though Nancy saw the worry in her eyes. Mr. Chike turned to Nancy. "Come to my office now." Nancy followed him, her heart pounding. What has she done wrong? Inside the office, Mr. Chike leaned against his desk, watching Nancy carefully. "You are close to my mother," he said. "She trusts you. I need you to help me protect her." Nancy blinked in surprise. "Protect her? Sir? From who?" His jaw tightened. "There are people inside this company who want to take everything from me. If they can't hurt me, they will hurt her." Nancy felt a chill run down her spine. She was just a simple girl. How could she protect someone as important as Madame Evelyn? I I don't understand," she said softly. Mr. Chike's voice softened slightly. "I know you're afraid, but I see something in you. Loyalty. If anyone tried to harm her, I need to know immediately." Nancy hesitated. This was more than just a job. It felt like a trap. But her heart couldn't refuse Madame Evelyn. "I'll do my best, sir," she whispered. For a moment, something softened in his gaze. "Thank you, Nancy." As she left the office, a strange thought crossed her mind. Why did such a powerful man seem so lonely? The days passed, but the tension only grew. Nancy paid attention to everything, the whispers, every glance. It was clear that someone was watching Mr. Chike closely. One afternoon, as she helped Madame Evelyn with her medicine, she noticed something strange. A file on the table marked confidential was slightly open. Nancy's hand trembled as she gently flipped the page. What she saw made her heart stop. It was a report about the company's finance, but someone has forged numbers. Millions of naira were missing. Before she could read further, a voice behind her said, "Curious, aren't you?" Nancy spun around and found herself face to face with Mr. Bayo, the head of operations. His smile was smooth, but his eyes were cold. I I was just helping madam," Nancy stammered. Mr. Bayo stepped closer. "Be careful where you look, Nancy. Sometimes curiosity can be dangerous." Nancy felt a shiver of fear. She had found the enemy, but what could a poor girl like her do? Nancy didn't sleep that night. She knew Mr. Bayo was behind the betrayal, but how could she prove it? And if he found out she knew, would he hurt her? The next morning, Nancy decided to tell Mr. Chike. She found him in the conference room, his face tense as he studied documents. "Sir," she began softly, "I need to talk to you." His eyes met hers, sharp and unreadable. What is it? She swallowed her fear. I think, I think Mr. Bayo is stealing from the company. The room grew deadly quiet. For a long moment, Mr. Chike said nothing. Then, without warning, he laughed. A cold, bitter sound. You are brave, Nancy, he said. But do you have proof? Nancy's heart sank. Proof? She had nothing solid, only suspicion. I saw the file, sir, she insisted. He knows I did. Mr. Chike's face grew hard again. Leave it to me. And, Nancy, be careful. As she left the room, Nancy knew one thing. The battle wasn't over. That evening, as the city lights glowed outside, Nancy heard arguments in Mr. Chike's office. She crept closer and froze. You betrayed me, Mr. Chike's voice rolled. You are too soft, Chike. Mr. Bayo spat. This company should be mine. But you trust a poor girl over your own people. Nancy's blood ran cold. Suddenly, the door burst open. Mr. Bayo stormed out, his face twisted with rage. He froze when he saw Nancy. You, he hissed, you ruined everything. Before Nancy could react, Mr. Chike appeared. It's over, Bayo. Security is waiting downstairs. With one last glare, Mr. Bayo walked away, but Nancy knew he would never forget. When the door closed, Mr. Chike turned to her. You saved this company, Nancy. Nancy shook her head. I just wanted to protect your mother.